just a bit of a sketch of today. So it's slightly different. You don't have Julia. In terms of structure, so there's a little bit of something that Lucille wants to share with the community to start with. And then we'll sort of invite ourselves into the conversation around the Enneagram 3 today, the topic of conversation. And just start with a little bit of reflexivity, actually, a little bit of looking at the kinds of things that we might bring to a session, a feedback, a conversation with the Enneagram 3s. What do I bring? What do they bring? What gets evoked in me when I'm working with the 3s, triggers and soft spots? When we picked that song, for those of you who were here, you know, many of those Enneagram 3 songs are kind of quite heavy and upbeat and all about winning and looking good and all of that stuff. And that was a much softer take on the 3, I think, in that song that we shared up front. But what comes up for you when you're working with them? And with us, I should say, as an Enneagram 3 myself. And then what comes up for the 3s as well as we have that discussion. So there's a reflexivity piece. We're going to look a little bit at the instincts and how different 3s show up. So Lucille will share some stuff around that. And then we're going to go off into breakout groups. And we've got a couple of bits of collateral to share with you, a couple of slides, a protocol from an Enneagram 3 client for you to go off and just discuss in smaller groups for a little bit. And then we'll come back and debrief that and explore it and see what happened and what you talked about. Is that all okay? Cool. Okay. Lucille, do you want to?
Great. Yeah. So first bit of business. Just for those of you that did your accreditations quite a while ago, I know that some of you might not be aware of the fact that we have added some new beautiful things to our Enneagram overview reports. So I just actually want to take a moment to show you what we've released in the last couple of iterations of our agile development process. So I'm just going to pull this onto the screen for the moment. So this is the first page of an overview report. It's actually the case study that we'll be discussing later on. But this you would already know. So basic information on the Enneagram style. And what we have now added is our new beautiful page 2, which is there for client consumption. So the first page is definitely for you as the coach. I mean, you've been trying to look at which are the narrative questions, which are the fear-based questions, how does this work? But this gives you, especially for very visual people and visual clients, a very nice way to bring together all of the different information. So what you will see here is on this side, you basically have a summary of section 1, and it's the same graphs that you see on page 1 of your report. But then this section here gives you a sense of the tri-type of the client, the wings and the lines, and how strong the client is represented in each space. So this is the profile of an Enneagram 3. You can see here the representation of the 2 wings at 2 and 4. And you can then read how much 2 is available to this client, how much 4 is available. So you can see of the wings, the 4 wing is stronger than the 2 wing. And just quickly clearing those drawings, you can also have a sense of the lines. The lines to 9 and 6 are indicated here. And once again, you can see, is there some easy access to 9? Yes, there is some. Is there some easy access to 6? No, there's not much access to 6. So that gives you a very nice visual way when you are coaching and using the Enneagram developmentally. And then the second thing or the third thing that you will see in this profile is you will see these colored blocks. So 8 and 7 and 3. And also, of course, in the middle of the profile, same numbers in there. That's the tri-type of the client that you find in the overview report. So it gives you a nice visual way of working with everything. For those of you that are very detail oriented, you might ask, what are these inside graphs? We call it the roses chart. What's the inside graph and the roses chart about? That's for section 2 of the report, when we actually just compare 3 numbers to each other, the tri-type measurement in section 2. also visually represented. So when the client had to choose between 3, 7, and 8, a lot of 3 and 7 was chosen, but not much 8. The last bit of this profile is right here at the bottom, just a sense of how the instincts stack. So you can see this is a socially dominant client with some self-pres and some one-on-one instinct available, but mostly social instinct. So hopefully this will support some of your coaching and developmental conversations with your clients in a way that's visually summarized and doesn't require you to read all the tables. And if you need to also put something in front of the client to show the distribution across all 9 Enneagram types, something that's really nice and handy here. So I'll just stop the share here and just ask, any thoughts on this? For those of you who haven't seen it, what do you think? Like, thumbs up, thumbs down? What are your thoughts on this? Thanks. Some thumbs up from people in the room.
Very nice.
Yeah. So this is part of the process that we're busy with at the moment. We'll also be reaching out to many of you to ask for your feedback and input on how we can improve our reports, to also continue to improve what we're doing. So we're doing short cycle iterations of development, and at different points in the next couple of months, you might get a call from us saying, will you mind telling us what you'd like to see in the report, or what you'd like to see refined? And thank you so much to those of you in this group who contributed to the development of those graphic representations of type. I'm very excited about it. So thanks for being our co-developers. Back to you, Simon.
Just to say there, I mean, the first thing to say is that the strategy of our business now is very, very firmly rooted in product. And so Lucille now has a product development team of 3 that are working quite rapidly around some of this stuff. So we're very much focused on that as a business. The second thing is just about that particular profile and a wondering around social 3s. So I'm thinking back around all of the social 3s that I've worked with, and I'm looking at that Enneagram 7 piece. And I'm struggling to remember a social 3 who didn't have a very strong Enneagram 7 style as well. And I think that's something to really watch for and look out for, and to coach around, because often there's a lot of 7 going on with the social 3s in my experience.
How do you make sense of that, Simon? What do you think that's about in your experience?
Oh, I mean, I think that there's definitely a showman aspect to social 3s. And so that 7 energy and the upbeatness that the 7 brings, I think lends itself to being up there in public after the limelight, and pretty charismatic as well. The downside of that, in my experience, is that the public shame or humiliation or failure is catastrophic, particularly for the social 3s. Yeah, anyway, just an anecdotal thing that I've noticed over time. Good. Shall we move?
Good. Okay. That's all I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucille. That's great. So over to you guys. I mean, I would just invite us into a conversation now around working with Enneagram 3s. And I see there's 1 or 2 of us in the group today. I'd love to just kick off with a wondering around what we bring around working with 3s. So what is the stuff that we have in working with Enneagram 3s? What do we take into these sessions? What are the kind of triggers and the soft spots that we might have for this style? So over to you.
I'm happy to jump in here. I have a 3 wing, but I know that when I'm working with clients who have a 3, I feel pressure to move to outcomes, to move forward, to achieve. And it's almost like it's just palpable, it's just in the space. So I have to be really conscious of trying to let go of that, to really sort of meet them where they are and to take time before like trying to clock stuff and reframe and like move and tick it off. And yeah, so I'm always very aware of that energy. that three energy that sort of comes in just as being in the field with working with the three.
And is that something that stays inside you, Kate, or would you name it into the session and use it and work with it? Because I mean, that's really cool data to have. Because if that person invokes that in you, then it's likely that that's happening out there all the time.
Yeah, so I've only worked with 2 3s, and the first one was right at the beginning of my coaching career. So I certainly didn't have the ability to work with it and name it at the time. I was just aware of it in myself and self-managed it. And the person I've just started working with now, I've only had 1 session, so I haven't really worked with it. But that's that's great, to work with it actively in the session. Yeah, good.
Yeah, because it's, in my experience, often not conscious for them either. Like what is that way of being invoking in others? How is that driving a culture within their team, for example? How do they set expectations for others? The pressure that gets put on not just work colleagues, but family members, partners. Yeah, it's really good insight.
What I also, sorry, another addition, what I also recognize, so that this person that I'm working with who's a 3, I'm also working with them in a group process. And inadvertently, I look to her. So if they're in smaller groups and they have to have a discussion or get somewhere with something, I use her quite actively in this smaller group, because I know she's going to bloody well deliver what's needed. She's going to be super focused, she's going to keep that group mobilized, and she's going to deliver what's needed. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm aware that I do that.
Well, what do others think about that as a strategy?
I have a thought on this. So, and it maybe relates to the broader question as well. So in my experience, Enneagram 3 energy is one of the energies that tends to make me feel that I am supposed to speed up, either as a coach or as a facilitator. So it's one of the types that often likes pace and gets impatient with processes that don't seem to deliver quickly enough, which then for me becomes performance pressure. So what I've noticed in a facilitation space is that if I orientate towards the Enneagram 3s too much in a group, sometimes the process is too fast for some of the slower types to also contribute. And so with slower, I just mean slower to contribute, want more time to think and process, rather than slower as a judgment. So I have found myself hitched to the speed of Enneagram 3s. And sometimes it's useful. And sometimes I think it's a seduction that makes it quite tough for more introverted, reserved types, and not even just introverted or reserved, but just types that need a bit of time to actually get to where I want to go. Some of that need to rev the engine in the driveway before we go for the Sunday drive. Yeah,
and I wonder if that protects the Enneagram 3 from their own learning edge there. So you're going at the pace that they want. Well, then where's the space for them to sit with the discomfort around a slower pace, for example? What comes up in them when they experience that going a little bit more steadfastly?
Yeah, I think that's a fast pace makes it very hard to get stuck in emotions. And so it often serves the agenda of going quite pragmatic and emotionless through a lot of things. And I'd bring the maturity frame into conversation with this as well, because at earlier stages and more conventional levels, the emotions are definitely part of what I avoid. And then from the internalizing phase onwards, I find that Enneagram 3s often become more curious and interested in emotions than they would otherwise be.
And in themselves as well. I mean, that was part of what that song that we played at the start was trying to say, is to move away from this object of doing. I mean, what's been interesting for me in doing my my research. I'm writing my thesis on shopping addiction at the moment, and whilst it's not universally a straight line that all shopping addicts are Enneagram 3s because they're into brands, there's quite a lot of that going on. And what I've found in particular is an early life experience of being treated as an object, as opposed to a human, a performance object, or an object that looks good. And often emotionally quite distant parents. So they learn very early on, well, actually, I am an object and I'm here to perform. And so that's an interesting thing. And to work with this idea that if we continue to look at Enneagram 3s as objects and not humans, then we're never going to kind of get the 3s out of that idea that all I'm here to do is to perform and to produce.
Question from Tsietsi, or an input. Tsietsi, you're on.
Thank you very much, Lucille. Good, is it afternoon or evening? Good greetings, let me put it that way. I'm looking at two things here when you're looking at the Enneagram 3. Type 1, status consciousness. Now, when you go into that coaching room or session, and you're dealing with this kind of person who's conscious about his status, how do I manage that as a coach? How do I bring him or her to the same level to say we're here as equals, we're here to support each other? And take that status of yours, put it at bay for a while whilst we're here, and let's be equals. I'm also looking at something that says Enneagram 3s being concerned about their image and what other people think. You then look at the question that we always ask within the coaching space when we say, what we're talking about here in this room and in this session, how does that relate to, and what significance does it carry for the other people within the circle that you're operating within the system that you're operating within as the client in the coaching space. So those are some of the things that come to mind that one has to be conscious of and be aware of as you engage with this type of people that we're talking about. Thank you.
Beautiful. I love that idea of status. And I mean, just to ask something there. So you were saying about how that can be equalized. So Tsietsi, your sense is that you would go in there and you would feel of a lesser status, and that and the Enneagram 3 would be seeking to take a more kind of a more elevated status in the coaching dyad.
It's more, Simon, of a question of sensitizing them. Remember, it is them who need to be aware of the situation and environment within which they're operating in dealing with the challenge that they're dealing with in that session. So you're then making them aware and conscious of the fact that in the session, we're here as equal partners. I'm here as a coach to support you, client, to achieve what you want to achieve. So whatever I'm posing through to you as questions, I'm not posing them through to you as a junior manager. Take, for example, a CEO in a company who's being coached by a professional, qualified coach who at some stage happens to be junior to them in terms of rank. Now you need to sensitize that CEO in this room. There's no CEO and there's no administrative assistant. There's coach and client who are here to walk a journey together.
Yeah, I love it. And we're asking the client to give up a lot there in some ways. And that kind of relates to power in the coaching session as well. I mean, I find even as an Enneagram 3, I work with my 3 clients and I can very easily slip into inferiority, very easily. When I look and they've got the job and the car and the clothes and the watch and all the stuff that I used to kind of hanker after and still do a little bit, if I'm honest. And then I find myself really slipping into that space of you're better than me. And if you take that on and it keeps going and keeps going, then you can find yourself as a coach in a space of, and so what can I give you here? What can I bring? You seem to have it all. What value can I add? You seem to have it all sorted, and you seem so together. So really watch that kind of inferiority spiral as well, around status and power. Yeah.
If I can come in from a facilitation perspective, I think some organizational cultures and also some countries that we might work in that carry a strong Enneagram 3 energy, sometimes there's this, it's funny, you experience this in places like India or Nigeria, for example, where there is this like entry-level requirement for you to establish your status if you're facilitating a group. And if you don't play that game up front, the group rejects you. So it's like a very interesting thing where sometimes you have to just step into I'm going to meet your Enneagram 3 energy momentarily and just say, look, this is the status that I bring in. This is my experience. This is what I've done. These are some clients I've worked with. Now can we do the process work? And if I don't meet that requirement to qualify myself, the groups turn quite nastily on you. And in any organization that has a strong Enneagram 3 energy within it, that's part of what you need to do. But the challenge is for me to not get seduced into then continuing the game. It's just almost like the entry requirement. And I make life much more complex for myself if I don't play that up front. And that's maybe a lesson that I think I've learned as someone who has underplayed some aspects that would qualify me with Enneagram 3 clients in the past.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's something around credibility for sure.
And not overdoing it though, not getting into some kind of competition with my actual clients. So this is the thing, the competitive energy of the Enneagram 3 can get me seduced into competing with the 3 around who wins then that thing, whatever that thing is, and that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Yeah, can I come in, Lucille?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Is it evening or afternoon, everybody?
Yeah. Hey, Wendy.
It's cloudy, so I don't even know whether it's evening or day. Yeah, I happen to be Enneagram 3 as well. So it becomes very interesting, and I love it to work with Enneagram 3s because I can see myself in them. But luckily, I have learned to be aware, especially from the Enneagram training, aware of those things, and now I'm able to bring them to their attention. And I also make it clear to them that, by the way, I'm also Enneagram, so that as we deal with these issues, they are with me. And I'm with them. So what I've realized with Enneagram 3s, this thing of, because the report would say you are competitive, you want to achieve against others and so forth, and we tend to deny that. Say, no, I'm not. I like to achieve, but I'm not competing with anyone. And I know I also initially thought that. I always thought I'm not competing to anyone, but I realized a lot of times I don't compete externally, but I compete internally, and that's what puts pressure in me. So I compete with myself. That's still competition. I have to do better than what I did yesterday. That puts a lot of pressure on me. So it's still competition, however, not with other people. And as we go along, because Enneagram 3s, we tend to think like, but that's how life should be. You have to achieve, you have to get things done, and that's the best way of living and doing things. Maybe to bring to the attention of the coaches to say, at what cost? And luckily, I've got experience also in that area where in my career, I was like, I will do these things, I will achieve, and I will stay calm. That Simon, the emotions part of it, not showing the emotions and so forth. They're still there. You're packing them somewhere, and they only hating you. So that is the cost that you're paying, and you end up being ill. So for me, it works very well when I deal with Enneagram 3s, because I can bring my actual life experiences and realities to the coaching. And at the end, I get my coaches asking for more and more sessions. Thanks.
Beautiful. And Wendy, if you don't mind me saying, in your accreditation assignment, you spoke to that, and it really struck me how you use your own life experience to allow the client to explore theirs. It's a very simple and very beautiful technique, and takes some guts too, particularly for a person who isn't used to stepping into that vulnerable space, as many 3s aren't. I mean, it's just not in our makeup. That's lovely.
That question of at what cost is useful for a lot of clients, but I find in particular for Enneagram 3s, that's often part of what stops me from, or what helps me wake up from the trance. So sometimes people would say things like, I do all of this for my family, and I work so hard that I never see this family, and that my family have become strangers to me, and that my family actually want to kick me out of the family because I'm never there for them, but I'm saying I'm doing this for them. So relationships. So if I'm throwing myself into proving that I have value through what I do, especially, it's not always work. It can be for people through the way in which my children perform, through being the best in a relationship. There's a lot of versions of that. But if I'm throwing myself into proving my value through what I do, then sometimes the cost of that can be really big and relational, and internally, the dampening of the emotional world. And sometimes there's deep sadness at the bottom of that when clients connect to that. Mumsy, you had your hand up a while ago. I don't know if it's still relevant, but over to you if there's something you still want to add.
Okay, Lucille, that was just really talking about, yes, I'm an Enneagram 3, and it is actually exciting to hear these other things that they're talking about with regards to Enneagram 3. And the nice thing was that the client that I had, my test case was an Enneagram 3, and really I had a good engagement with her without even actually telling her that I'm an Enneagram 3. So, and we went on, and it was really interesting because of it's somebody who's achievement driven. And yes, like the question that's saying at what cost, whereby, this person wants to work 24/7 and they're involved in so many committees, and all they want to do is just to deliver. And it was quite interesting listening to the client as they were unpacking their childhood and how things have really evolved and changed. And I really enjoyed having a conversation with that client, and I appreciated their input, their motivation, what drives them, why they are always focused on achieving. And yeah, that's what I wanted to contribute, to say, yes, Enneagram 3s are workaholics, in a sense, and all they want to do is just be out there and deliver. Thank you.
So what might be the blind spots for an Enneagram 3 coach working with an Enneagram 3? For those of you out there, you know who you are.
I can add something. I think often, because I'm also a social 3, and I think often people automatically assume that you like to be out there, and thrive in the spotlight, but there's the other side to it. It's also the often lots of anxiety in social context, and I think people don't always realize that. And in terms of how you appear, and if how things that you're going to say are going to be accepted, and all of that. So I think that's an important thing to be aware of.
Mm.
They're not always as confident, as outgoing, even though they do like the spotlight.
Yeah, well, now that's really relevant. I mean, I worked for, it was quite a while ago, with an incredibly senior person in one of the banks, who also had a profile quite similar to yours, and most of our coaching was around social anxiety, and it was so extreme for him that, I mean, he started the coaching process. Really, the only thing that I want to do is I want to take anxiety medication to get rid of this. Like, I don't even want to talk about, because talking about it gets me there. And it was close to panic attacks for him. And you would never be able to tell. I mean, I was in some of those presentations that he did to very big audiences. You would never have known that on the inside, he was so close to a panic attack that it wasn't even funny.
Yeah. And I mean, just to throw something in there as well. So having worked with some threes who have experienced exactly that thing in groups, the levels of anxiety in groups, and often that can be about, so when your life has been about creating this image that goes then out into the public space, and it's an image that is at least trying to be immaculate, then every one of those public interactions is an opportunity for that image to lose some power and be tarnished, and for me to say one wrong thing that means that people now think I'm a bit of an idiot, and it's all an opportunity for failure. And often that for me is the link between the social space and in groups and failure for threes. It's always there. It's always a possibility. And that's often why threes can shut up in groups sometimes. I find groups deeply scary. I've said this before. I stay away from groups I work with them, but I find them really scary places sometimes. So yeah, that can be very much in play, that anxiety. What else comes up for you and threes?
I think the other thing that I've picked up from the client that I've engaged with is the fact that, yes, there are an SP3, that's preservation, but because of that link maybe to Enneagram 6, she said to me, she actually prepares, like, if there's a speech that's going to be happening next week, for the rest of the 2 weeks, it will be preparation and preparation and preparation. She makes sure that she doesn't say anything wrong or fail, in front of people. But it's like, that stress throughout the 2 weeks before the day of presentation, to say, I need to prepare and over prepare. And then I found that to say, yes, you are appearing as you are an achiever, and in front of people, you are, just a smooth talker. They don't realize the hard work that goes behind the scenes for you to be on that platform to be the best you can be, at what cost? Yeah.
I sometimes find that it's an interesting question to say, are there other things that you under prepare for because it's not in the public eye? So how much of this is about it being on the stage or in public, in a place where failure carries a very different consequence to in a more private space? CHC. So Simon, you go, and then CHC. We've seen your hand.
CHC was first. I was going to ask something else.
Thanks, Simon. Lucille, just a question springing from what Mamsi has just brought up now. What are the chances or possibilities of the Enneagram type 3 sorry, slipping, used here tongue in cheek, don't have a better word, into Enneagram type 1 zone, that perfectionist element that I'm hearing here.
So I can maybe throw something out there at that. I have quite a lot of 1 going on. But the difference for me between the 3s and the 1s is that the 3s will do stuff so that on the surface it looks fabulous, but you might just open that cupboard door and find quite a lot of mess. But the outside of the cupboard door is immaculate. Whereas I think the 1s, you'd open the cupboard door and all the tins would be stacked beautifully. You get the idea. It's like, it's about whether it looks good or whether it is good. And is good for an Enneagram 1 is all the way down. From 0 to 100, it's got to be spot on. For the 3s, I think we can skate a little more around that and shortcut a process, because in the service of efficiency, and not follow all 6 steps, but get the outcome in half the time.
I'm wondering if part of that has to do with locus of control in some kind of ways, where for the Enneagram 1, the issues around getting it right comes from an internal locus of control a lot of the time. And for Enneagram 3s, there's a lot of the natural orientation, at least at early stages of maturity, to start from external locus of control. So in reference to the world, as opposed to in reference to my own internalized ideas of right and wrong. And surely it's not all that. But sometimes that is part of it. And I know of some Enneagram 3s, and I think, Simon, this is part of your story as well, where part of your Enneagram 3 was shaped by an Enneagram 1 father.
Yeah,
I'm wondering
absolutely.
if there's something of that you want to share, because I think that could be useful for the group. And it's not true for all Enneagram 3s, but at least part of this story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was certainly something about Dad. I got 96% in the Latin exam, and he would ask me what happened to the other 4. I think, a lot of people who have been parented by 1s have experienced that kind of thing. But I think that it was also around conditional praise. And so at the end of every term, if I got a good report, then I would be able to go to London and go to Hamley's toy store and pick out a thing, an object. But only if I got a good report. If I got a bad report, then there would be nothing. Actually, there would be shame. And I think that shame is something that forms quite early on in the Enneagram 3's life. And if you're going to work with anything with the 3s, anything to send us into a spin and get aggressive, it's shame. And often that is just an early experience of not measuring up, of failing. And of course, with an Enneagram 1 parent, those opportunities are everywhere.
I want to ask something, or maybe just put something out there. So there are some ways in which we haven't named some of the judgments that you sometimes encounter, or that might be triggered for you when working with Enneagram 3 clients, or even if you, so some of the judgments, Enneagram 3s are dishonest. Enneagram 3s, can't be trusted as a result. Enneagram 3s are chameleons. Enneagram 3s fake it until they make it. I mean, I don't know if there's some more ones that we want to throw in here. I mean, so these are quite harsh ones. And I'm wondering, what else we need to say.
I also wanted to raise that, like, we've been quite kind to the 3s so far, and to ourselves, and we've hidden some of the shadow stuff. But what's the irritations here with working with 3s? What pisses us off about those 3s? Because that's really important for us to know. Lisa?
So I've got just for context for everybody else, I've got an interesting relationship with a 3. I've identified as a 3 for most of my Enneagram life, and then found out last year that I actually am a 9. I'm also married to a 3. So, and a lot of my bosses end up being 3. So 3 is a big number in my life. And I think my journey when I was I identified as a 3 was and that and being quite a bold to see is coming across as
Lisa, it feels like you're saying something really important, but you're breaking up at the same time. So I'm wondering if it's useful for you to just repeat that maybe with your video off, because it felt like an important sharing, but we couldn't hear you.
sorry, a little bit bad. Everything's been going on and off. Can you hear me now? Better. Perfect. Okay. No, I was okay. So what did you hear? Where do I need to pick up from?
Just you said the start. Enneagram 3 is big in your life, and then you wanted to say when I identified as a 3, and then we lost you.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, when I did identify as a 3, my journey around sort of maturing and growing was really around trying to be more authentic. So I think I identify with the sort of chameleon. This is not a word, I'm going to make up one, chameleonity of a 3. But I feel that it's linked to the perception of lack of authenticity of a 3, which is where I found myself when I identified as a 3. And it was purely because of that wanting to adapt and sort of adjust my skin to fit into whatever the environment was, and move on quite quickly and sort of ignore myself in the process, and how I think to the lack.
Oh, Lisa, we've lost you again.
We've lost you again, but
ignore myself in the process, and
okay. Lisa's in the chat box saying I'm done. Yeah, that idea of chameleoning around and losing yourself, and your new understanding that that's actually your 9-ishness at play.
I have to say that for me, part of what that chameleon adaptive approach evokes in me when I'm coaching Enneagram 3s is I sit with this question a lot of the time that says, am I being played here? Is this really, I mean, and so we know all our clients have subjective versions of reality, right? But I find that I have to work with this thing inside me that's saying, is this even close to what's true? Am I being played? How do I find out if I'm being played or not? Sometimes that's hard for me.
And how do you? And do you name it?
So I do sometimes name it, saying, I'm wondering what the other parts of the story are, or how you might be dressing this up to look better than it is. I know with one Enneagram 3 client I coached, we always had to get this. So this thing of, she would only bring issues to coaching once she's felt that she'd solved them. When she could narrate the story of how her success in dealing with the thing, as opposed to when she's in the messiness, which then for me, I was like, so just remind me again why we're doing coaching. Is it for me to affirm that you've solved it in a brilliant way? Because if that's the case, I think there are other people who can do this more effectively with you. And that was something that we worked all the time. But then unpeeling that further was like, is this really as done as you say it is? Or is that just is that part of like presenting something that makes me still feel like a success, but actually I'm here to want to talk about it, but I can't even say that honestly. It gets really complex around what are we really doing here? Are we talking about what you're done with, or is it really here because you still want to work it?
And then the coach can feel quite useless, actually. I've no value to add. Maybe that's just my stuff, an Enneagram 3, but I've no value to add here. You've got all your shit together. Why do you even need me? And that's often a nice entry point, because then that can open up them going off and thinking about why they might need you, and maybe dropping the act a little bit. What else? Other irritations?
Yes, something that sometimes happens for me with threes is a kind of a trigger. Is this immense performance orientation and this appearance of incredible effectiveness, which triggers me as someone who often don't feel that I'm there and barely hanging on. And then in me arises this suspicion of deception, and that's something that I then want to prod and sort of feel and see if I can get there, and so on. I don't know that it's always fair and right, but I want to get around how does the self-deception work? Is it even there? And I guess what goes with that for me is a certain frustratedness when I encounter that what seems to me to be a deceptiveness around the emotional world. So the emotional world is presented in some way with quite a lot of confidence, but I have the suspicion, and sometimes going there, but that it's actually not. It's quite well hidden. It's not the real emotion that's there, and yeah, like I say, for me that is triggering and frustrating. To some extent, I have to tread very carefully and I have just happened to work with lots of threes somehow. And then I guess as a 9 also I have this thing that I want to make it safe for somehow safe, that failure is actually okay, and to get to the theme of failure and what it means to fail. I know I once asked a 3 in a group session. I said to him, and he was like very senior in the group. He was the leader of the group. I said to him, "What's the cost of not failing?" And he just looked at me with the most incredibly blank look. I thought, okay, that wasn't so clever. But there's for me, there's a I have the sense that there's something, and I want to get there, and sometimes yeah, that's the trigger, both the trigger and the frustration.
Yeah, but failure is a beautiful doorway in, obviously. I mean, we know this, we're Enneagram practitioners, but almost like a repeating question kind of approach to failure, because the first failure that you'll get is an inconsequential failure that happened when I was 12. And it was a maths test, and I got 48% when I was 12. So that's your first failure that you'll get. And then you ask again, and then you ask again. And there's almost something quite freeing and opening up around the repeated question and going more and more into the failure, and asking the client to go more and more into the failure. And sometimes that's the thing that's going to work best is the pain, and keeping them in the pain, like 7s, you know, you hold their nose down to the grindstone until it bleeds. Sometimes that's the way that you're gonna get something.
I mean, the things to watch for when you're using this approach of interrogating failure, and as you go deeper into the layers, into things that are closer to the core in some way, so unpeeling the story in some way, is to note whether the narration of the failure turns every failure into a success through the telling. So I got 48 for that maths test, but then I became like a genius at maths and I won a trophy in grade 7. So can you see the failure is really the thing that then gets turned into a success, all the way through to my relationship really failed and that hurts, but hey, I got divorced and now I'm in a really happy place with my new partner. So this thing of not staying in the failure and projecting it into then how this propelled me into the next success, as opposed to just allowing that to be a very interesting part of just watching out for in both coaching and in groups.
Lucille, I'm thinking, should we look at the instincts?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because we haven't spoken much about the instincts actually. And threes are very, very different in flavor.
Do you want to talk it through, Simon?
Sure. So the three expressions of the core passion of the three, which is vanity. So the self-pres 3 is almost the kind of anti-vanity. My vanity is I have no vanity. This is the company man, the company woman who wears the uniform of the company. So if efficiency and effectiveness looks like a smart overall with a pen in my top pocket, then that is how I will look. The identification there in terms of success can be much more understated than the other two instincts. So you might not find the brands. You'll find a decent Bucky, perhaps, but you might not find the Merc or the BMW and the Rolex and all of the kind of showy stuff. But in true self-pres fashion, you may well ask them about their investments and the properties they've got tucked away and the pile of cash in the bank. So there's something about knowing that I'm a successful me. And this is where, Wendy, your point around competitiveness is interesting, because the self-pres is the most likely person to be competing with themselves. They will set themselves targets and then watch their success internally and won't necessarily have to brag about it. The social 3 is the big stage 3 often. So the one that likes the limelight, the one that is looking for the praise and the plaudits and the thousands of people who are following them and watching them and noticing what they're up to. And so status in the group there for the social 3 is particularly important. And the image consciousness for me is heightened with the social 3. And that kind of public failure being catastrophic that I mentioned earlier is often in play as well. And then the sexual 3, so this is my subtype. And this is quite an interesting one, because there's a little bit more emotion going on with the sexual 3, as we find with many sexual subtypes. But the main manifestation of success is often around attractiveness. So let me look the part so that I can attract the significant other. And be loved and adored and worshipped. So success looks a little bit different there, and they might not necessarily be competing just for themselves, but to be associated with particularly a partner who is successful and one can promote is really important for the sexual 3. All 3s, most 3s that I've met anyway, will have some challenges around self-esteem. Actually, it's the sexual 3 who has in some ways got the most challenges with sexual esteem, self-esteem, because the image is predicated on how good I look. Lucille, do you want to add anything in there?
Yeah, I think that sense, the important thing is to note that the self-preservation 3 is the unusual expression of the 3. So it is the place where the vanity and the competitiveness is more masked and often more consumed in fitting in. In many ways, many self-praised 3s can, to Tsietzi's point earlier, on the outside look a lot like Enneagram 1s. They can tell the story of being the hardworking, responsible company man or woman in some kind of way. What I have found in interesting ways is the way in which different subtypes work with kind of something like social media presence in some way. So where the social 3 often, for those that do social media, not all 3s do, but often social 3s build a very strong public persona, and it's about my opinion and winning arguments and in some way shining myself. Many sexual 3s would build the profile around my family or my team being presented as immaculate. So it's not so much me. I can be a little bit in the background to some extent, sometimes in the way in which I present the story of success out there. And self-praise 3s can be sometimes terribly, sometimes it hangs out there a bit, but they're still trying to win arguments, but it doesn't have to look good all the way through. I don't know if that makes sense to some extent. Rikus, you have a question? Oh no, there was just a little hand over your face, but it's my hand on my screen. Sorry, it's not your question. I was grabbing your beard virtually, Rikus. Sorry.
We can talk about that later.
Thank you.
Please do, but later. I think the other thing around the SP3, so there's workaholism across the three threes, but I see workaholism really showing up in the SP3. I mean, these are the guys when we work in mining and we work in petroleum sector, these are the guys that are going to the plant at 3 in the morning. It is not their shift. There is a problem with the reactor or the refinery, and they're there. They're there at 2 or 3 in the morning. They're open to being called. They are 24 hours there on demand. And often it belies very little of a life elsewhere. There's not much going on relationally. There's not much going on socially. And that idea of really being wedded to the corporate, to the company, I think manifests particularly with the SPs from what I've seen.
It does with all of them, but it has a strong, that 2 a.m. flavor, absolutely.
Yeah.
Alida and then Tessa.
Yeah.
Alida and then Tessa.
So Simon, speaking of the mining industry, I've worked with quite a number of 3s. And I think something that's often come up for me with 3s, and that I don't think we've ever really spoken about, is aggression in 3s. How if that kind of they feel their likelihood of success is being threatened, they can actually become extremely aggressive and almost 8-like. I mean, some of the most unpleasant people I've ever worked with have been 3s. So I don't know if that's something anyone else has experienced.
How do you make sense of the unpleasantness or the switch from 3 to 8 that I somehow hear you speaking about? What made it particularly hard for you to work with some of these people that you're recalling at the moment, Alida?
Well, I think they would, as I said, they would literally just become very shouty and aggressive. And it's often, I feel, when it's something that they feel is out of their control or something that they feel shouldn't be that way and is now threatening their success. It's always got to do with, this is going to affect their production targets or something like that. And it would actually just become really aggressive. And often there would be a bit of lying coming in there as well, and trying to throw other people under the bus. It's just something that I've never really picked up with other types so much. Not even with 8s, actually.
And Alida, what happens inside of you in those moments where you're experiencing this?
I just usually become really annoyed and angry. Like, don't take out your stuff on me.
So I guess the one thing that I'd notice about that positioning in relation to that is that that might leave you in a place where you're an angry victim. Because someone's doing it to me. So just note and check where that leaves you.
Or doing it to someone else, but I'm witnessing it. Yeah.
So the things that I've seen around this is Enneagram 3 is one of the more assertive types on the Enneagram, and assertiveness and aggression are close cousins, as we know. And that thing of when you are interfering with my story about how successful we are or are going to be or are about to be, and especially if it's numbers related or public image related, it can trigger something that's a little bit like an argument that will only end once you've lost and they've won. So where Enneagram 8s will go, oh, to hell with you, this is your argument, or they'll throw you under the bus and then they'll get you out and they'll, give you a beer afterwards. The Enneagram 3 will make sure that the bus goes over a couple of times.
Yes.
And so that's sometimes the difference. So it's not, so Enneagram 8s get energized by the confrontational energy. The Enneagram 3 actually wants the outcome where I win and you lose. And so sometimes the meta and the balcony perspective around what's happening is one of the only ways in which you can break that downward spiral of the argument. And it's to say, I'm wondering what's happening here. It seems as if you feel that your production figures are under threat, and that the only way that we're going to, in some way, move forward from this issue is if you get your way. And it feels like this is an argument that will only end once you're right and I'm wrong. So it's the meta, the observer perspective. Once you get hooked into playing the argumentative game, which is easier.
They wear you down.
Yep.
Yeah. They wear you down.
Yep. So that's
well, I mean, don't forget, I've been working my whole life to win this argument that we're having right now.
Because that's the only one that matters.
It's all that matters, because I was fabulous in the past. I'm going to be fabulous in the future. But right now, in this moment, my fabulousness is being threatened by you. So I'm going to take you out.
Yeah.
The question then becomes, so then how do you rediscover some compassion when this is in your face? Because as you've said, you get angry.
Yeah, but I think initially it might have been a lot worse. Now I know why it's happening. I know that the person is doing that because they're feeling threatened. And I think then approaching it from a point of a position of compassion is a bit easier. And actually distancing myself from that, so not getting drawn into that kind of argument.
Yeah. Was something that Russ Hudson said in a workshop that I went to when we were talking about the threes, and I still yet haven't managed to say this without tearing up because it's just so massive for me. But he said, you've got to have compassion for the small boy who's been dancing really hard. And that's just profound for me. And it can really take you into a more compassionate space.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly. When we remember that actually there's just a small boy in there who's been working hard his whole life. And yep, this argument is another manifestation of having to win.
Yeah.
But actually, he's terrified. Failure is life-threatening. Losing is life-threatening. When I've wrapped my whole identity around this thing and this moment. Because it's pretty tough when we're in your face, but you know.
Yeah. One of the most so one of the stories of Enneagram 3s that I've heard that really allowed me to access compassion was a man who was kind of mid-level manager in an organization, who was the only child of the third wife of a Zulu father. So in terms of rank, I mean, he had many older siblings, and his mother was like the last in the rank in terms of who gets airtime from dad. And he told the story of being a young boy growing up who danced really hard, as Simon said, just to have his father actually notice his existence. So many siblings, I mean, social hierarchy in many ways in that family system. And him telling the story of how he feels that even now that how he never really succeeded. And in part it was to, not just for him, but also to get his mother, who he really adored, to have his mother seen in relation to the other wives in that family system. And he spoke quite a lot around how he still dances in relation to male authority figures in the organization, from the assumption that I am not seen and will not be seen, and that I have to go over and beyond myself before I can even be a blip on the radar. And he shared his story in such, just in a way that really landed in many ways.
I think usually, oh, sorry.
No,
when I see this kind of regression coming from threes, there are usually young managers still trying to establish their careers. Yeah.
And that means that I have nothing to fall back on.
Yeah.
I don't have the last 6 years where I was the hero in some kind of way. I'm still trying to prove that I'm the hero. And this is showing everyone that I don't have a cape, and,
Yeah.
Yeah. Tessa? You're on mute again.
Here I am. I'm taking copious notes. Sorry, I've got. Hi, everyone. I'm Tessa. I am a trainee still, I guess. My assignment is due next week, and my practice client is a 3. So when this topic changed, I was like, children, husbands, juggle everything. So my question was about the instincts in terms of, so my client is a sexual 3 with, that's the same as the one-on-one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was wondering, is that linked to their 2-wing? Or is it just coincidence?
I'd go for coincidence.
Okay, because that's really strong for them, is that 2-wing. And then their tri-type included a 1. And so I really thought that they would come up as the SP3 in their instinct, but that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I was a bit confused about that.
Yeah, so I would, when working with the instincts, not get too seduced by trying to find proof of the instinct in how the other Enneagram numbers express. So if we think of the one-on-one instinct being more likely to relate to, in some way, feeling that the thing that might threaten my survival most is if my intimate relationships are in some way not, intimate relationship failure feels like survival threat. Yeah. So that's what it means. You can't go and cross-reference. I mean, it just gets too complex. And then you try and create a story for the client around the 1 and the 2 and the this and the, just work with the instinct as it is there. And then what we find with many SX one-to-one sexual subtypes is that often the instinctual wounding, that sense of somehow my world collapsing or my survival being threatened, often people with the sexual subtype, that wounding happened a little bit later in life. Whereas with self-present social, it may have happened earlier in life, the later in life being kind of high school years, maybe late primary school years, that there was a survival, an experience of a significant event that upended my sense of my capacity to survive in those years. And sometimes also a complex relationship around triangulation between parental figures. mother figure, father figure, stepping in for, having to mediate in relationships, whether present or absent. So think more in those terms than thinking this is linked 100% to that and that and that. It just gets too complex to answer it in the numbers. Mostly it's to be curious about how that shows up in the client's life and have that be the answer.
Okay, and then
is the self-praise second in the stack? What's the lowest instinct?
no, the lowest is the self-praise.
Okay, so
yeah,
that's developmentally something to explore. Who knows what's that about until you've spoken.
It's just really surprising because he's like completely wedded to his company and a workaholic, but he is new and trying to prove himself. So maybe that's part of what you were saying earlier.
Most Enneagram 3s are workaholics. Self-praise 3s just are willing to kill themselves for the company. So most Enneagram 3s that are in organizational roles are in that space. Yeah. Something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that that's a beautiful opportunity to reinforce a point that I know gets reinforced in this environment quite often, which is work with the client first and work with the report second. So who's in the room? How does it show up in that person? How are they showing up into the space? Rather than going in with the report, they're going, oh, well, they're going to be like this. And sometimes we do that because we want to create certainty for ourselves that we know what we're doing and we're going in and we're going to have a strategy with this person, but actually that's often not helpful. So just go in and explore and just meet the human.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just really interested in how you're saying not to get too entangled with the instincts and linking with those numbers, because this client and the other practice client are in the same company and they work really well together. So one of the things they wanted to know was, like, why do they work so well together and how can they work even better and how can they, recreate that in other parts of the company? And it's a 2 and a 3.
Okay.
So then I'm trying to find the links maybe.
Okay, so let's take a very different view on this just for a moment. So 2 and 3 are next door neighbors, and so often they present the adaptive strategies that they both need to not become too narrow and boxed. So our next door neighbors present adaptive strategies that help us do the everyday things a little bit better. Yeah. And often people that are next door on our neighbors, so they represent our wings in some way. So it can feel like my wing is your wing or is your body, or it feels it's easier to connect on the circle of the Enneagram in some way because of that. So that's the first thing. But then secondly, think about what 2 and 3, so both of them sit in a center, in the heart center, where they are interested in some way proving that I'm worthy of love with different strategies. So the one by being helpful and the other one by being effective and successful. So we have a common thing. We're trying to make ourselves loved in some way in the organization so we can collaborate nicely. 2s often lead from relationship and 3 from task. So we complement the energies here in many different ways. So you help to make them play nicely, and then I'll get the job done. So there's so many ways in which we can complement each other in that space if we find a common a common something that bond us together. So I guess the question beyond the Enneagram would be, what is the purpose or the agenda that you share, or the value base that in some way make you tune into each other's complementary energies in such a good way?
Good.
Thank you.
Shall we? Sorry.
I had another question very briefly about the fight response and how could that be linked to this feeling threatened and the aggression coming out?
But check it out. Check it out with that client. But absolutely, and generically, if we're to speak about threes and aggression, then it will be, you have threatened my identity here, and my identity is as a successful person.
And that brings up the fight.
Big time. Shall we have a little look at a case study, Lucille? And maybe just do a little bit of a breakout, maybe 15 minutes, probably tops.
Yeah, so I am going to pop the case study in the chat box, so all of you can just download it directly from there if you want a copy for your breakout. Shall I just put it on the screen again, Simon? Then you can brief people on that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've got the spiders and the bar graphs and the numbers. You've also got the protocol, so the sentence completion protocol for this person. And I can say a little bit about this person because I know her and I've worked with her for quite a long time. So this is a white Afrikaans woman from Gauteng, Northwest, working in the mining industry. That's as much as I'll tell you about that. Her husband also works in the mining industry and is very senior. This person is very senior. She has 2 perfect children. They've done very well at school. They do ballet and play rugby. And they have a couple of houses, this couple. They have big parties. They have lovely brides. The husband is an Enneagram 7. And they have a fabulous time. And every time I see them, they tell me how fabulous they are and how fabulous their life is. She's done quite a lot of work though, actually. So when I first met this person, she was, for those of you who use the maturity language, so she was very much at a specializing technical level. And then she did quite a lot of this kind of work. And so we measured her somewhere else, actually, as far as this protocol is concerned, at a performing level. She's recently been promoted again. That has necessitated a move to Johannesburg, at least for the job. And so the commute has been daily, and then an apartment in Johannesburg was taken. And now most of the time is spent on the job as opposed to with the family. Is that enough of a background, Lucille?
Yeah.
So the invitation then, as we send you off into breakout groups, and just a couple of questions really, get a feel for this person. So this is a social 3 at a performing level of development, of maturity. Get a feel for them, read the protocol, get inside the skin. What does this person feel like? What's important to them? How do they see the world? How do they see themselves? And then maybe a supplementary question, Lucille, I don't know whether you want to add, but how would you coach them? So what are the doorways in here? What do you notice about this person, and where might you want to go, and where might you want to land with them in a coaching setup? Lucille, is that enough?
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay.
So you've got that available to you. We're going to send you off into the ether. Are there any questions before we do that?
Yeah, I guess from my side, just use the protocol to see if you can find any doorways in from the coaching perspective. You don't need to assess it at what maturity level it is, but just see if there are themes that you can pick up from that. Mary?
I don't know how to download from the shared screen. I don't know how to do that. How do we get that?
You should just click it.
Just click it and then it downloads?
Click it, and then you might have to click it again.
I don't see it. I don't see it. It's not there now, is it?
In the chat box. Just go to chat.
Okay, let's see.
And scroll down, and there's a PDF sitting in there now.
Okay.
And you just click on it, and then you'll find it in your downloads folder, or you can just open it once it's downloaded. And hopefully one person in your group has that. So I'm going to open rooms, make sure that you have a copy of the protocol as you go, and feel free to call us into your room, 15 minutes. So let's be back at 5:45. Simon, please, it's sending you to a breakout room. Please don't follow that.
Okie dokie.
There we go.
Okay, have fun. See you in a bit. Bye-bye. Again, Lisa.
Done.
Everybody mostly is in. Who's not?
No,
We had
everyone's-
15, now we've got 14. What's happened?
They'll come back.
I think Lisa is having problems with her internet.
She really is having
no.
trouble.
No, there she
Here
is.
she comes. Okay. So tell us about your conversations. What did you talk about? What feel did you get for this person? What came up?
Alida?
Alida.
I think something that that immediately came up for me was the fact that she has a 7 in her tri-type, and you said that her husband has a 7 as well. How would they handle unpleasantness and when things go badly? Because there might be a lot of pain avoidance.
What would your suspicions be?
Plaster it over nicely so that it looks pretty from the 3, social 3, and do everything possible to try and avoid facing whatever's gone wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much it is what it is how failure is often described. And there's a very fast moving on. That's a really good wondering that you've had there, good insight.
Yeah, I've also seen this strategy in similar couples where instead of talking about what's going on, we'll entertain.
Or take a trip.
Or take a trip, or just like fill the space with other people, and then we can be in relationship with people we actually like, and therefore avoid having the conversations about stuff that's going wrong for us.
And I have to say, sorry, because I know them quite well. So, and cars, new cars are a balm for this couple. They're changing their cars every 3 months sometimes. I know it's so stereotypical in some ways. There's bloody 3s in their cars, but it really does seem to work for them. Yeah. Good. That was a good insight. Others? What else did you talk about?
Simon, I love my cars.
No, I love my cars too, Wendy. I know. We have to ask ourselves deeper questions around what those cars signify and the role they play in our lives, but that's for another time. What else did you explore?
A question that sort of came up for me was there's sometimes in 3, it seems this thing of I sacrifice myself. I sacrifice myself for my family, and that's why I have to work so hard to be successful. And then there's a very fine line between a certain kind of selfishness and real self-sacrifice. And what I'm very curious about is how that would play out in this move to Johannesburg and not being around the children. There was a very interesting line in the report, in the sentence stems, the one around the other gender who's got it lucky because they don't have to shine and they're not judged when they have children, etc. So that clearly is something that's a trigger point for her.
Yeah, and quite a kind of conventional view as well. Huh?
I think in our group, we also spoke about how is she still keeping contact, how is the relationship with the family now that she's at the distance? Is she keeping contact regularly, or is it just being focused on work, 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 and forgetting that there's another life outside work? That was our curiosity point.
Yeah, I mean, and look at the "when I die" sentence. You know, in the context of what you've just said. You know, so the workaholism's there, and she's not there very much, but still there's this expectation that she's going to leave a legacy, and her children are going to remember her very fondly and making a huge difference, and that she was kind. And I wonder, how can you do that when you're not there?
So that's an interesting point and I think that is sometimes part of where you get a door into working with deception, and especially self-deception inside the Enneagram 3. So if the story is that I'm doing this for my kids, and I'm actually in a place where I'm quite relishing potentially withdrawing from the family system and the ability to throw myself into work, and therefore sacrificing the kids and the relationship there, you know, just to say, so what's true and what's not true. And it's not as simple as the one or the other, but this is the story of, you know, oh, I'm doing this for the kids, I'm doing this for the kids, is part of a doorway into a potential conversation that's much larger around many forms of deception, both self-deception and the ways in which I may be in bad faith in my own life.
Yeah. But when you look at this person, I mean, in her world's view, when she says, I'm leaving a legacy for my family, for her, legacy means I'm working very hard, I'm going to get things, accumulate things, and I will leave it for them, and they will remember me very fondly. So, so yeah, she's genuine, and in her model of the world, legacy means things, accumulating things, working hard so that you accumulate things, and they must be happy. They mustn't complain about her not being there because she's doing it for them, you know.
Yeah, self as object, other people become objects, and then objects become important.
Can I ask
Absolutely.
a question?
Notice she
How
said,
does...
I want...
So
Sorry.
Mary and then Rikus.
Okay, I was just going to ask if a 3, when they're not looking great, and they go into that catastrophic meltdown that you were describing, Simon, do they blame other people for it, or do they blame themselves for it?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to answer that. If we're going for a short, simple answer, then I would say that, 3s would tend to externalize the blame as opposed to internalize the blame. It's just too risky to hang on to it.
Okay, that's exactly what I thought.
I mean, it's idiosyncratic, and that's not a blanket rule, but my gut says that one straight answer would be that.
Okay, thanks.
Would it possible? Sorry, Rikus first wanted to.
Just what I noticed that when I die, I want to leave a legacy with my children, not for my children.
Yeah. What do you make of that, Rikus?
That just seems to lift out in that conversation that legacy is not necessarily, it's not as much about the children as it's about the legacy, perhaps. There's somebody to hold the legacy rather than to receive and benefit from the legacy.
Yeah, lovely.
That's one way of looking at it. Some of that might be, if you look at the rest of the script, just some Afrikaans versions of English as well.
Oh, okay.
A legacy vir my kinders, with my children, bad translation, while doing things quickly. There's some other language, idiosyncratic stuff happening in the rest of the script around language that, who knows? I mean, we don't know for sure, but just leave that as a possibility in interpreting the script.
Also, isn't part of the legacy that the kids look good? And so she's leaving her legacy by having her kids look good.
So, something to explore. Margaretha and Kate.
So idea in terms of a possible doorway in, linking to the line to 9, is maybe the question around, what do you, or have you asked your children what they want? To access that piece and maybe get a deeper doorway in.
And that works with Rickus's with the kids, with asking them with that. I like that. I think the one thing that I would just caution around this as a primary doorway in has to do with role stereotypes for women, and asking if we would, and so this is just a question, would we go as hard for this doorway with men that have made similar choices? Because often there is a tendency to punish women who put their careers first. And so as coaches, we just need to work with that thing and ask, have I gone as strongly with my male Enneagram 3 clients that have moved to another town and gotten an apartment? And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Yeah. Kate?
I was intrigued by the first part of the protocol. Felt like she's really grown quite a lot in terms of her responses. And then I was interested in towards the end, when I'm criticized, I feel hurt, but sometimes I feel that I deserved it. Felt like a very, I don't know, out of sync with a performing level. Or is that particular to the 3 of, because I would have imagined that at performing maturity, criticism is seen as an opportunity to grow. So it was quite striking that it feels quite putting down.
Yeah, but the pain never goes. I mean, it lessens a little bit, and we can put another story around the criticism as we mature. But it's still painful. And I think what strikes me about that is it's quite a mature position to take when I can acknowledge that criticism hurts me. Because at an earlier level, you would get stuff that's tantamount to the other person's wrong, or I'll evaluate it and see how I feel, or there's an arrogance around criticism. Whereas here, there is a connection with what goes on inside of me,
right,
when that criticism lands.
So often in those protocols, the revelation of the internal, as opposed to the defending against the internal response that's human, for all of us, shows us a doorway to maturity. So that is actually a wonderful doorway into coaching conversations. What is that thing about deserving it? Let's explore. When do you feel you deserve it? When not? How is that actually potentially serving as a way of you driving yourself harder to avoid shame? There's lovely themes that you can pull out of that sentence. It stood out for me in the protocol as well as a very interesting, unusual sentence. It's not a sentence we find often. And so it actually is part of the early entry into the post-conventional levels in that sentence.
Yeah. And we wouldn't know this. I mean, okay, this is a bit of a punt and a bit of a sales moment, but hey, I'm Enneagram 3, so what are you going to do? You wouldn't have this if you didn't get the full assessment. So when you're in a position where, you go, okay, Enneagram only or full assessment, if you can take the full assessment, then you get 14 windows in to working with somebody that you wouldn't necessarily get, and you wouldn't even get in a session, because some of this is actually much deeper than you might get in a session. So I think that there's something to be said about the richness of the lived experience of this person that you get when you do the full assessment, and maybe that's something to bear in mind when you're buying links. He said unashamedly.
Shall we end off? So next week, Julia's back, and she's going to talk about existential approach to race and working with race in the coaching space. One of those topics that we talk about a lot in life and very little in coaching. Yeah, looking forward to that.
And then the weekend after that, Sasha van Dersen Smith is back from London. Some of you may have seen her a few weeks ago talking about an existential approach to coaching. So she's back in 2 weeks' time for another guest slot. So we're very fortunate to have her back. Cool. It's 6 o'clock. Thank you for coming. Thank you for a vibrant discussion about my people.
Thank you.
And well done the threes for taking it. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.